It was late October of 2003 when deputies Caleb Morton and Dana Kirkland from the Ashfield County Sheriff's Department were dispatched to what, on paper, looked like a simple welfare checkout in the far reaches of rural Illinois. The call concerned an older man named Elwood Granger, a well-known 72-year-old widower and retired farmer who hadn't been seen around the local seed supply shop or the nearby church for over 2 weeks. Folks in town said that was out of character. Elwood was social, predictable, the kind of guy who always made time for conversation and kept to a routine. His place sat at the very end of a narrow, winding dirt road, flanked on both sides by harvested cornfields stretching all the way to the horizon. The 2-story farmhouse had belonged to the Granger family for generations. But when the deputies pulled up, something about the stillness immediately put them on edge. No dogs barking. No cows lowing. Not even the sound of hens rustling in the coop. "Got a bad feeling about this one," Dana murmured as Caleb eased the cruiser into the gravel driveway. Elwood's old pickup was still in its usual spot, parked beside the front porch. The porch light had been left on, faint and hazy in the late afternoon sun. They knocked and announced themselves, but when no one answered, they made the call to enter. The smell hit them as soon as they cracked the door. It was unmistakable. Anyone who's been on the job long enough learns to recognize it: death, ripened by time and trapped inside. But it wasn't just the odor that burned itself into their memories. It was the scene waiting for them in the living room that would follow them for the rest of their lives. There were 5 bodies, each one placed carefully in a semicircle, sitting upright in wooden dining chairs that had been carried in from another room. They were dressed in clean clothing, hands resting neatly in their laps. Every single one of them had been dead for days, maybe longer. In the center sat Elwood Granger, and flanking him were 4 strangers, 2 men and 2 women, who would later be identified as missing persons from neighboring counties. They ranged in age from 19 to 64, and each had died in a different way. Every one of them killed differently, Caleb would later testify. But it was like they'd been staged. Like they were set there to watch something. They weren't watching a television. They were all facing one wall. And what had been set up on that wall defied easy description. There, arranged with methodical care, was what investigators would later refer to as an altar. Hundreds of newspaper clippings, all yellowed with age, were pinned in precise, concentric circles. Each article was about a different unsolved murder stretching back to the 1970s. In the very center, framed by the chaos, was an old photo, a family portrait of the Rowley family, Elwood's neighbors from 30 years ago. They'd been slaughtered in their home in 1973, a case that had never been solved. But that was just the beginning. Down in the basement, they found what could only be described as a personal chamber of horrors. Surgical tools, leather restraints, journals stacked like old newspapers, page after page filled with meticulous entries, Elwood's handwritten reflections, fantasies, and recollections of what he called his life's work. DNA would eventually tie Elwood Granger to 7 previously unsolved murders across Illinois, Missouri, and West Virginia. The most unsettling part? He'd been living like a model citizen, volunteering at church picnics, organizing neighborhood events. He even helped set up the county safety fair just that summer. All while trophies from his victims were tucked neatly away in his attic. Deputy Kirkland would later write in her memoir, "What shook me the most wasn't the basement, or even the altar. It was the pie. Elwood used to bring homemade pie to the sheriff's department. I'd eaten it. We all had. That's the part I'll never get over." Then came the twist that turned the case from horrifying to legendary. Tucked into one of the journals was an old Polaroid. It showed a younger Elwood Granger standing beside a uniformed officer, Officer Victor Rowley, the man whose family had been killed in 1973. The notes beside the photo revealed a decades-long grudge Elwood had nursed. He blamed Victor for an earlier arrest, convinced the man had humiliated him. Officer Rowley had spent years investigating his own family's murder. He never suspected the quiet man down the road. He never connected the dots. He died in 1999 of natural causes, without ever learning that his family's killer had lived right next door. that he'd spoken with him, shaken his hand. The Simmons case, now retitled officially as the Granger case, ripped through law enforcement circles like a wildfire. It became a key study in FBI profiling seminars and was permanently added to federal training materials on long-term embedded offenders. It changed how welfare checks were handled in the region. No more assumptions about the sweet old man down the lane. No more taking community familiarity at face value. Deputy Morton left the force 2 years later. Deputy Kirkland transferred to an urban precinct, explaining in an interview, "I can't drive past a cornfield without seeing them. That circle of bodies. All those faces, turned toward the wall like they were waiting for an answer that never came." The farmhouse was eventually torn down after it became a morbid tourist magnet. But the story never went away. Because it wasn't just about a killer hiding in plain sight. It was about patience. About vengeance. And how some people will spend a lifetime building the perfect stage, for a finale only they'll understand. Today, the patch of land where Elwood Granger's farmhouse once stood remains barren. Not a single weed grows. Some locals whisper it's the aftershock of evil, like the earth itself refused to reclaim what was taken from it. The official explanation is more clinical. Soil samples later revealed high levels of chemical contamination. Decades worth of photo-developing fluids had been dumped in the yard, waste from Elwood's obsessive documentation of his crimes. Whatever the cause, nothing has grown there since. What made the Granger case especially chilling for law enforcement wasn't just the grotesque staging, the journals, or even the scope of Elwood's crimes. It was how close it had come to being missed entirely. Had someone not noticed Elwood's absence at the Ashfield grain supply, had they not thought it strange that his porch light never turned off, the scene inside might have stayed hidden. His final display might have quietly rotted into the walls, and the connections to decades of unsolved murders might never have come to light. To this day, patrol officers and detectives alike still talk about it in training seminars. A simple welfare check, a routine knock on a door, how easily it can flip into something nightmarish. How the most ordinary people in the most ordinary places can house monsters. It's a lesson that was reinforced again in February of 2011, when officers Victor Langley and Jenna Alvarez with the Millshade Police Department responded to one of the strangest 911 calls they'd ever received. The call had come in just after 11 at night. The voice on the other end was garbled, panicked, difficult to understand, but one detail came through clearly. The caller claimed to be trapped inside Blackmere Sanitarium. Problem was, Blackmere had been closed down since 1997. Budget cuts, lawsuits, and a long history of abuse and neglect had shuttered the place nearly 15 years earlier. It sat on the far edge of town, hidden behind a rusted wrought iron fence and acres of overgrowth. The old psychiatric facility, built in the late 1800s, had never been torn down. Preservation boards had argued for its protection, and environmental issues made demolition complicated. So it stood, abandoned, hollow, and haunted by reputation alone. It was mostly just local kids sneaking in for scares. Officer Langley later told First Response Quarterly. "We'd run them off now and then. Nothing serious." But this night felt different. They arrived at 11:42 p.m., headlights sweeping across the building's boarded-up facade. Fresh snowfall covered the ground, except for a set of footprints leading to a basement window that had been forced open. Worse, a trail of blood cut through the snow. Bright against the white. Obvious in their flashlight beams. With backup delay due to a pileup on the highway, Langley and Alvarez made a judgment call. There was blood. And someone could be hurt. Weapons drawn and flashlights ready, the officers climbed through the open window and into the freezing dark beneath the hospital. The basement was what you'd expect from a place untouched for years. Mildew, rot, crumbling walls. Their breaths came out in thick clouds. Paint peeled in sheets. Rusted gurneys lay toppled in the corners, and old patient files were scattered across the floor like confetti from some long-forgotten nightmare. The blood trail led deeper and deeper, down into the hospital's surgical wing. That's where they found it. One of the old operating rooms had been cleared out, cleaned, restored. Battery-operated lanterns had been rigged to hooks on the walls. A stainless steel gurney stood in the center of the room, polished and ready. Modern surgical tools, scalpels, clamps, lines, were laid out neatly on nearby trays. It looked more like a working clinic than a ruin. They radioed it in, their body cams recording every frame, footage that would later become central to a multi-state investigation. What followed only deepened the mystery. Several adjoining rooms had been converted into what could only be described as living quarters. Camping cots, canned food, jugs of water, first aid kits, even a small propane heater humming softly in one corner. Whoever had been living there had been doing it for a while. "We found journals," Officer Alvarez later testified. "Hundreds of pages. Medical notes, anatomy sketches, surgical logs. Same handwriting throughout. It was obsessive." The trail led them to the morgue. Down into the sub-basement, where light barely reached and the air felt like breathing through ice. The old body storage units, long disconnected, had been repurposed. Their steel doors still worked. And inside? Dozens of containers. Some held tissue samples. Others had entire organs. Each one was labeled. Each bore a date, some as recent as 6 weeks earlier. They barely had time to process it when a sound echoed through the hall. A crash. Metal. Followed by a faint voice. A call for help. They followed it to what had once been the secure ward, deep in the hospital's core. There, behind a rusting steel door, was a padded isolation cell. And inside? A man. Early 20s. Gaunt. Handcuffed to a rusted pipe along the floor. He was alert, but barely. Eyes glassy. Abdomen wrapped in makeshift bandages soaked with red. "My name's Kyle Corwin," he croaked. "I'm a med student. I was taken 3 days ago. Outside the library. Guy said he was hurt, said he needed help." Kyle Corwin hadn't seen the attack coming. He'd stopped to help a man who said he was having chest pains, looked pale, short of breath, stumbling. Kyle had instinctively stepped in. That was his nature. That's why he was going into medicine. The man pulled out a stun gun and hit him in the ribs. Kyle barely hit the pavement before everything went black. He woke up hours later, strapped down in a cold room, surgical lights blazing overhead, his mouth dry and his stomach burning. His captor never gave a full name, just said to call him Dr. Varnell. That name would soon send a tremor through the medical world. As officers Victor Langley and Jenna Alvarez were unfastening Kyle's restraints and radioing for backup, they heard footsteps coming from the corridor. A figure stepped into the doorway. An older man. White hair. Slumped shoulders. Wearing blood-stained scrubs and holding a scalpel like it was just another day in the OR. He was so damn calm, Officer Alvarez would later say in an interview. That's what stuck with me. He looked at us like we were the ones out of place. Like we were barging into his clinic. The man was eventually identified as Dr. Douglas Varnell, 76 years old. A former surgeon. And years ago, a staff physician at Blackmere Sanitarium. The very place they now found him squatting in. Records showed Varnell had been stripped of his license back in 1994. Accusations had piled up, unnecessary surgeries, unauthorized experimentation, procedures without consent. When the officers ordered him to drop the weapon, he didn't hesitate. He smiled. I'm in the middle of something important, he told them. I can't stop now. Then he lunged at Officer Alvarez. In the struggle that followed, Alvarez fired once, hitting Varnell in the shoulder and knocking him to the ground. Even as they treated the wound and waited for medics to arrive, Varnell kept talking. Kept explaining his research. Kept insisting it was all necessary. That he was on the verge of a discovery that would change the world. The truth that came out in the weeks that followed was almost too twisted to believe. Varnell had never really left Blackmere after it shut down. He came back not long after the last staff had cleared out. Found a side entrance unlocked. And he stayed. Over the next 14 years, he built himself a hidden sanctuary deep in the hospital's administrative wing. stole equipment from clinics and hospitals across Illinois, Missouri, and West Virginia, created a lab, built his own surgical suite, stocked pantries, hooked up propane heat, brought in victims. He had created a whole world down there, said Detective Colleen Mercer, who headed up the investigation. Living quarters, storage, notes, photos. It wasn't a setup, it was a system. His journals detailed everything. Procedures, theories, medical diagrams, names. More than 24 victims. Some had died quickly. Others, not so much. The most disturbing part. Varnell truly believed what he was doing was meaningful. That his experiments, focused on trauma tolerance, tissue regeneration, organ function, were going to change medical science. He was convinced he was a pioneer. Most of the people he took were individuals no one was actively looking for. Homeless men, undocumented women, people from bus stations and shelters. Until Kyle Corwin. In Varnell's own words, he needed a subject with clinical understanding, someone who could grasp the significance of the work. Kyle had been chosen because of his medical background. The case ignited fury. Not just over the horror Varnell inflicted, but over how long he'd gone unnoticed. The hospital had technically been closed, but it had never been secured. No regular inspections. No structural check-ins. No cameras. Nothing. Local teens had told stories about the Black Mirror ghost for years. An old man glimpsed through second-story windows. A figure wandering the halls. Footsteps echoing at night. But nobody ever reported it. It was folklore. Urban legend. Until it wasn't. Varnell was charged with kidnapping, unlawful confinement, assault, and murder. His trial was short. He never showed remorse. Just kept talking about his discoveries, even from his hospital bed. He died in prison in 2016, convinced that someday, someone would publish his work. For Langley and Alvarez, the trauma didn't fade quickly. Officer Langley left patrol work entirely. He now speaks at police conferences about infrastructure failures and the dangers of overlooked properties. Alvarez transferred to cybercrimes, quietly telling colleagues she preferred cases where the files don't scream. Black Mirror Sanitarium was finally demolished in 2013. The demolition only went forward after every room had been photographed, catalogued, and cleared. They found more remains. Some were linked to Varnell. Some dated back to when the hospital was still operational. The site is now a small memorial park. Stone benches, trees, a simple plaque. The original foundation remains intact, like bones beneath the grass. A reminder not just of Varnell, but of every system that failed to stop him. People say the hospital was supposed to be a place for healing. Officer Alvarez said in her final interview. But that place was twisted long before Varnell ever picked up a scalpel. He just made it literal. The Bear Hollow sector of Redvale County was infamous for its isolation, especially in the dead of winter, when many of the rougher backroads vanished beneath feet of snow. During heavy weather, even the more traveled paths became impassable without serious tires and a solid four-wheel drive. Most of the cabins scattered out there were hunting spots or rustic weekend escapes for folks out of Cleveland, but a handful served as permanent homes. Mostly older folks. A few hermits who liked space more than they liked company. We'd run these winter check-ins plenty of times. Sergeant Joe Fenwick later told investigators. Never anything exciting. Just making sure folks hadn't frozen to death or gotten snowed in too deep to call for help. But that day would turn out to be anything but routine. At exactly 3:47 p.m., with daylight already dimming under the gray northern sky, the radio crackled with a report from dispatch. A 911 call had come through, and then dropped, from deep within the Bear Hollow forest. The call had been placed from a satellite phone registered to Dr. Calvin Dresner, a 58-year-old retired trauma surgeon who had moved into the area 3 winters back after hanging up his scrubs. Both Fenwick and Deputy Tara Holden were familiar with him. Dresner lived about 7 miles up a snow-blanketed trail called Elk Ridge Trail, one of the loneliest outposts in the county. What made the report strange wasn't just the dropped call. It was that Dresner never called at all. He was the self-sufficient type. Holden wrote in her report. Had solar, generators, and enough supplies to ride out a blizzard. If he reached out, something was off. With heavy snow already falling, they flagged the call high priority and turned off onto Elk Ridge Trail. In their department's snow-equipped SUV, chains on the tires and emergency kits in the back. Roughly 5 miles up the trail, the first red flag came into view. A black sedan with city plates had skidded off into a ditch, stuck deep in fresh powder. It was angled like someone had swerved suddenly and lost control. The driver's side door hung slightly ajar, and inside, the cabin was cold and empty. Registration confirmed the vehicle belonged to Dr. Philip Renner, a former colleague of Dresner from his hospital days. The name rang bells. The two had worked closely together. But what really caught their attention was the condition of the car. The windshield was fractured from the inside. Blood was smeared along the interior door handle and across the driver's seat. Not a lot. Just enough to raise every hair on their necks. We called it in, Fenwick said. But with the storm moving in faster than forecasted, we figured backup wouldn't reach us for another hour, maybe more. So they pushed forward, toward Dresner cabin. Both officers activated their body cams, kept their radios live, and followed a clear set of boot prints leading away from the abandoned sedan, not toward the road, but perpendicular to it. Right into the woods. You could tell from the prints, Holden said. Whoever it was, they were running. Long strides, uneven footing. Blood droplets in the snow told us they were hurt. Roughly half a mile into the forest, they found him. Dr. Philip Renner, face down in the snow, limbs twisted at strange angles. His coat had been slashed open, blood soaking the fabric beneath. Multiple stab wounds to his neck and back. Snow around him kicked up and scattered, clear signs of a struggle. He was still warm, Fenwick noted in the post-scene interview. He hadn't been dead long. Maybe an hour. Maybe less. And the scene didn't feel planned. It felt chaotic. Violent. Desperate. They kept moving. A single trail of footprints now, Renner's attacker. The steps wove deeper through the thickening snowfall. Visibility dropped fast. Trees leaned heavy under the fresh powder, and the wind began to howl through the canopy. By the time they reached Dr. Dresner cabin, the sky had gone black, and the temperature had nosedived into single digits. And that's when things got even stranger. The cabin stood in perfect condition. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney. Lights glowed warmly behind curtained windows. It looked cozy, like a photo in a holiday postcard. But the snow around the cabin? Pristine. Undisturbed. Except for one thing, a single trail of bloody footprints leading from the forest straight to the front door. That image stuck with me, Holden said later. Like someone had walked out of the woods, stepped into a painting, and vanished. They knew they should have waited for backup. That was protocol. But the storm was starting to mess with radio signals. And someone inside could be bleeding out. So they went in. Body cams rolling. Weapons raised. The front steps groaned under their weight. The porch light buzzed. And the door? Cracked open. Just wide enough to see that same trail of bloody prints disappearing across the floor inside. Announcing themselves as law enforcement, Sergeant Fenwick and Deputy Holden stepped into what the courts would later label a display of calculated lunacy. The inside of Dr. Calvin Dresner cabin was surprisingly neat. Spotless, really, except for the muddy streaks of blood that snaked through the entryway and the makeshift operating setup occupying the living room. Medical tools were neatly laid out on a sterilized linen. Textbooks, thick, heavy volumes, were cracked open to specific pages dealing with neurological anatomy and brain surgery. Over by the fireplace, Dresner sat motionless in a leather armchair. He had changed out of his earlier clothes, a stained shirt and blood-soaked trousers now soaked in a basin beside the hearth. On the table in front of him rested a sliver of bone. Human skull. He looked at us like we were just there for coffee. Fenwick would later say. Like none of what we just hiked through mattered. Dresner didn't resist. He answered their questions openly. Almost too openly. According to the body cam footage, which would later be dissected in legal proceedings and law enforcement trainings alike, Dresner calmly explained that Dr. Philip Renner had come up from St. Louis to confront him. The two had worked together years earlier at St. Louis General, both respected neurosurgeons until Dresner abruptly retired and dropped off the radar. Dresner said Renner had grown suspicious. He'd found inconsistencies in old case reports, particularly in pathology results. Reports that suggested Dresner might have been performing unauthorized surgical procedures on patients. He'd come to confront him, maybe even expose him. Their conversation had started in Renner's car, en route to the cabin. It escalated. Dresner claimed Renner became aggressive, threatened to take what he knew to the medical board. So I neutralized the threat, Dresner reportedly said, without a hint of emotion. But what truly disturbed the officers wasn't just the killing, or even the calmness. It was the reasoning. Dresner claimed he hadn't been chasing Renner through the woods. He said he'd led him away from the cabin, away from his work. The evidence. With Dresner in cuffs, the officers began a full sweep of the property. In the study, a bookcase swung outward to reveal a hidden room. Inside, it was cold. Clinical. Refrigeration units hummed against one wall. Shelves were lined with sealed containers and labeled jars. Tissue samples. Preserved organs. Several trays of carefully wrapped human brain matter. Everything labeled with dates, patient names, notes scribbled in careful, legible handwriting. There were even printed hospital records and journal-style entries. Detailed logs of every operation, what he did, how long it took, and what he learned. This wasn't a man dabbling in madness, Fenwick said later. It was method. Pure method. Power generators in the back kept the place running through any storm. The refrigeration units weren't consumer grade. They were lab quality, likely stolen or bought under a false name. Someone had poured a fortune into this place. And not recently. This had been in motion for years. As the storm outside turned from heavy snowfall to full-blown whiteout, the officers had no choice but to hunker down with their suspect. They were cut off. For nearly 7 hours, they sat in that cabin, waiting for backup. Dresner spoke in spurts. Sometimes he'd lean forward and wax poetic about his research, how the brain processed trauma, how surgical timing affected regenerative responses. Other times he'd go still and silent, gazing into the fire like the world beyond the flames didn't exist. When asked about the 911 call that had brought them there, Dresner admitted something else. I called it in myself, he said. After Renner died, I realized I had to control how this unfolded. Better that you find the scene on my terms, than a pair of hikers finding his body come spring. The case made national headlines. Not just for its horror, but for how it was handled. 2 officers, a blizzard, and a mile-deep hike into one of the most remote corners of Redvale County, uncovering what would turn out to be one of the most methodically hidden crimes in state history. The footage captured by Holden and Fenwick has since been used in police academy trainings across the country, an example of field composure, evidence handling, and suspect control in a high-risk, isolated scenario. Dr. Calvin Dresner was convicted of the murder of Dr. Renner, along with numerous counts of illegal medical experimentation, aggravated assault, and the unlawful collection and preservation of human biological materials. He received multiple life sentences, without the possibility of parole. For the officers, the case left scars, mental ones, mostly. I think about it more than I should, Deputy Holden said during an interview 1 year later. That a man who spent decades healing people could walk into the woods and just reinvent himself. No ethics board. No oversight. Just his own rules and the space to act on them. She paused, then added, the forest didn't change him. It just gave him room to become what he already was. The cabin was demolished after the investigation, but no one sets foot near that part of the forest anymore. Hunters avoid it. Hikers veer wide. Locals started calling the trail that leads their doctor's path, though you won't find the name on any official map. Even seasoned trappers won't go near it now. Too many stories. Too much silence. Too much left behind. Winter silence has its own weight in the forest. Snow flattens the world. Even the trees seem to hold their breath. But what happened that summer in Greywater, just as the heat began to settle over the pines and the lakes glistened with late daylight, would haunt that quiet community far more than any blizzard. Detective Elise Corwin had served with the Greywater Police Department for 15 years. She'd seen her share of thefts, accidents, even the occasional tragedy. But the radio call that came in just past 8 p.m. on a sticky July evening in 2019 marked the moment everything in her career, and her town, would pivot. Possible break-in. 237 Cliffside Lane. Silent alarm triggered at the Whitmore property. No response to callback from the monitoring company. Corwin acknowledged the call, gave a short reply, and turned her cruiser toward Timberlake, the county's postcard-worthy centerpiece. Encircling the lake were sprawling luxury homes, mostly owned by wealthy out-of-towners who used them as vacation getaways. The Whitmore place was one of the most famous, a sleek, steel and glass modernist build perched right at the edge of the cliffs. It had been featured in multiple architecture blogs and lifestyle magazines. The kind of house people pulled over to take photos of. 10 minutes out, Corwin radioed as she navigated the lake road's sharp bends. The evening sun had dipped low, casting a bronze haze across the water. Her new partner, Officer Adam Kessler, sat beside her, scrolling through the digital property file on the patrol laptop. Registered to Graham and Lillian Whitmore. Lives in the city. Lake House hasn't been accessed in over 2 weeks, he said. Sounds about right, Corwin muttered. Most of these folks come up for Independence Day, then disappear until Labor Day. As the road narrowed into a private gravel drive, Corwin dimmed the headlights and slowed the car to a crawl. If this was a burglary, no need to broadcast their arrival. The house came into view, low profile, shadowed by pines. From a distance, everything looked undisturbed. Too neat. Let's go in on foot, Corwin suggested. I'll take the drive. You circle the woods. They parked 100 yards down the road and split off, weapons holstered but hands ready. Communication stayed live through their radio earpieces. As Corwin crept up the main path, she clocked the pristine security panel at the front door, still glowing, undamaged. No busted locks, no shattered glass. The wide windows reflected the lavender evening sky, hiding whatever was going on inside. East side's clear, Kessler whispered into her earpiece. Headed to the back patio now. She was starting to lean toward a false alarm when Kessler's voice returned, tense, clipped. Elise, you're gonna want to come around back. Now. Corwin hurried around the side path, boots crunching softly on the stone walkway, until she emerged onto the expansive slate patio. Kessler stood frozen near the rear sliding doors that faced the lake. He didn't say a word, just pointed. The glass was streaked with blood. Not splatter, streaks. Handprints, smudges, a red trail leading down from the glass like someone had tried to open the door from inside while already bleeding. Corwin's stomach dropped. She called for backup immediately. Inside, the minimalist decor looked untouched. Everything was arranged with showroom precision, except for the red path that trailed into the open-concept kitchen. Police, Corwin called out, drawing her sidearm. Anyone inside, make yourself known. No reply. The glass door was locked. With visible signs of trauma inside and no response, they had cause to enter. Corwin pulled her baton and shattered a small square near the handle. The blood smell hit them instantly, coppery and heavy. The kind that gets into your sinuses and sticks. On the floor beyond the island, a man lay motionless. Early 30s, expensive weekend wear now dark with blood. Multiple stab wounds to the torso. Eyes wide. Dead. Corwin dropped to her knees out of habit and checked for a pulse, even though she already knew. Clear the rest of the house, she told Kessler. He swept through it, room by room. Nothing, he said after a few minutes. No suspect. No other victims. Then he hesitated. But there's something upstairs you need to see. The master bedroom was neat. Not a thing out of place. Crisp sheets. Pillows fluffed. But on the bedside table was a broken picture frame. A wedding photo. The glass was shattered directly over the woman's face, carefully, almost intentionally. That's not Graham Whitmore, Corwin said slowly, pointing at the man in the photo. I've met him. He's in his 60s. Whoever lay downstairs bleeding out wasn't the homeowner. And the woman in the photo? Her name would become very important in the next chapter. Before they had time to fully process what they'd found upstairs, Corwin's radio crackled back to life with an update from dispatch. The homeowners have been reached, the dispatcher reported. Lillian Whitmore confirmed that neither she nor her husband are at the lake house. They're both still at their apartment in the city. Officer Kessler looked toward the floor below, where the bloodied man lay lifeless near the kitchen. Then who the hell is our dead guy? He asked, more to himself than anyone else. The next 3 days unraveled a tangle of betrayal and secrets that had been building inside the lake house for months. Maybe longer. The victim was identified as Travis Corbin, a 34-year-old portfolio manager from downtown West Haven, and, as it turned out, Lillian Whitmore's lover. Forensics quickly revealed that Corbin hadn't just been a one-time visitor to the Whitmore home. His DNA showed up all over the property: bathroom towels, a wine glass, the master bedroom sheets. He had his own alarm code, Corwin told the assembled task force. She gave it to him behind her husband's back. Security data confirmed the routine. Travis would show up late Friday, usually after dark. He'd stay through the weekend and leave before Monday morning, slipping in and out while the Whitmores were miles away, none the wiser. But this time, Travis wasn't alone. 20 minutes after he entered the home, a second entry was recorded. Another access code was used, this one registered to Erin Corbin, Travis's wife. She knew, Detective Sergeant Owen Stratton said as he stood beside the evidence board. She found out about the affair and followed him here. The rest was captured on the house's extensive security system. Every inch of the property, inside and out, had cameras. What they showed stunned the entire department. Erin entered calmly. No yelling, no fight at first. She confronted Travis in the kitchen. When he tried to dismiss her, laughed in her face, even, the tone shifted fast. She grabbed a knife. 11 stab wounds. Afterward, she washed the blade, slid it back into the knife block, wiped down the counters, and walked out the front door. The only reason they were called at all was because Travis, bleeding out, had tried to drag himself to the patio door, triggering a motion sensor that sent a silent ping to the alarm company. Like it was nothing, Kessler said as they watched the footage. She cleaned the blood off her hands like she was done doing dishes. Erin Corbin was arrested at her apartment the following morning. She didn't bother denying it. Yes, I killed him, she said during her recorded interview. He wasn't just sleeping with Lillian. There were others. Dozens. And he made me feel like I was the one losing it. According to Erin, Travis had spent years gaslighting her, accusing her of paranoia, urging her to seek therapy, even threatening institutionalization when she got too close to the truth. But then she found photos on his cloud account. Photos of Travis with other women. In other luxury homes. Properties that weren't his. They belonged to executives. Business partners. Clients. Travis was running a personal playbook, seducing the wives and girlfriends of powerful people to gain leverage. Blackmail. Promotion. Investment opportunities. The Whitmore home was just one of several such locations. And Erin? She was collateral damage. The broken wedding photo in the bedroom? That had been her final message to Lillian Whitmore. You're not special, she said. You're just one more stop on his way up. Corwin testified that Erin had planned everything. She tracked his location through GPS, timed her arrival precisely, brought gloves, took the knife from the house, even knew which cameras were where. except for the censor at the patio. The court case that followed drew national attention. More than just a murder, it was a dissection of manipulation, trauma, and the line between cold-blooded violence and long-simmering retribution. The defense leaned hard into psychological abuse, temporary insanity triggered by sustained emotional cruelty. The prosecution called it premeditated and brutal. Testimony from former partners, colleagues, even Travis's ex-fiancée painted a dark portrait. Secret recordings. Coercion. Lies stacked on lies. One woman said he'd filmed her during an intimate moment without consent, then threatened to leak it when she tried to end the relationship. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Erin Corbin was found guilty of second-degree murder with mitigating circumstances. She was sentenced to 15 years, eligible for parole in 7. Public opinion was divided. Some called it justice. Others called it a tragedy years in the making. Detective Corwin reflected on the case during a talk she gave to incoming recruits. "The part that sticks with me isn't the crime. It's the setting. That house, glass walls, perfect furniture, picture-perfect views. It was built to impress. But it was all illusion. Just like their lives. The marriage, the career, the affair, every bit of it was waiting to crack." She paused, then added, "And all it took was one night. One woman who stopped being quiet. And a house made of glass." The infamous glass house near Timberlake sat untouched for years after the murder. Locals said it had gone quiet, like the land itself was trying to forget. Shortly after the trial, Graham and Lillian Whitmore finalized their divorce, and within months, the property was quietly listed, first at market value, then at a steep discount. Even then, no one wanted it. "It's curse," one real estate agent said off record. "You tell someone what happened, and they lose interest before the second showing." In 2022, after 4 years of sitting empty, the house was sold to a private developer who razed the structure within weeks. "There was no saving it," he told the press. "The damage wasn't structural, it was reputational." In its place rose something far more traditional. A craftsman-style home with wood siding, stacked stone columns, and no hint of the sprawling glass walls that once gave the home its name. The new owners declined interviews. For Detective Adam Kessler, now a seasoned investigator in the Greywater PD, the case stayed with him. The glass house wasn't just a crime scene, it was a metaphor. He later wrote in the department's case review manual, "Transparency looks beautiful, but it works both ways. You can show off your life, or have your secrets exposed. Depends on the light." He added a caution to future officers. Perfect homes aren't always peaceful. Sometimes, the most dangerous people are already inside, using the door code. To this day, patrol units responding to calls in the Timberlake area still refer to suspicious domestic incidents as a possible glass, in quiet reference to the Whitmore case. Far from the lakefront estates of Greywater, another story was beginning, one that would stretch across the dark miles of Route 11, a lonely stretch of desert highway with few lights and fewer answers. State Trooper Derek Faulkner had spent nearly 8 years patrolling Highway 39, which cut through the vast, sun-baked landscape north of Mesa Grande. Most nights passed without incident, just Faulkner, the hum of tires, and the endless blacktop unspooling ahead. But the night of October 12, 2018 changed that. Just past 1 a.m. Faulkner had pulled into the Red Bluff station. Truck stopped to top off his thermos when a dispatch alert crackled across the radio. "Abandoned vehicle, hazard lights flashing, mile marker 154. "Copy that," Faulkner responded, already pulling out onto the dark ribbon of highway. This particular stretch between mile markers 150 and 160 had a reputation. No cell service. Patchy radio. No towns for nearly an hour in either direction. Officers knew to be cautious. Backup could be more than 40 minutes out. "Approaching now," Faulkner said into his mic as the vehicle came into view. An older model sedan sat parked on the shoulder, its hazard lights blinking steadily, an amber pulse cutting through the desert dark. Following department protocol, Faulkner stopped his cruiser a short distance behind the car, angled slightly toward the roadway for protection. He read the license plate aloud. Dispatch responded after a moment. Vehicle registered to Teresa Kane, 43, out of Tucson. No active warrants. Tags up to date. Faulkner stepped out and approached with caution. The car was cold, engine silent. No signs of damage. The driver's door was unlocked, and the cabin was empty. Inside, he found a purse in the passenger seat. A cell phone. A nearly empty water bottle. A light jacket tossed in the back. Everything pointed to someone who expected to return soon. But they hadn't. Dispatch, Faulkner reported. I've got a vehicle abandoned with personal effects inside. Requesting support for a possible missing persons check. As he waited, he began photographing the scene. That's when he noticed something odd. The car keys were still in the ignition. And then another detail, tracks in the dirt. Not footprints, more like something dragged from the driver's side door into the brush. He moved closer, his flashlight sweeping side to side. 30 yards off the road, where the dirt turned to gravel and dry scrub, he saw a glint. Something small. Metallic. He crouched down. It was a woman's watch. Silver. The clasp broken. Dispatch, I've located what may be a personal belonging, approximately 30 yards from the vehicle, he said, voice tight. Circumstances here are not standard. I'm conducting a perimeter sweep. The desert stretched quiet around him, still as stone. And the woman who'd worn that watch? Gone. But not far. Not yet. The backup officer Walsh had asked for radioed back. They were still roughly 25 minutes out. Given the delay, Walsh made a call. He widened his search, working outward in slow, controlled spirals from where he'd found the watch. About 50 yards off the shoulder, tucked behind a cluster of large rocks, he came upon something that made his stomach tighten. A fresh grave. The dirt had been disturbed recently, and the shape was unmistakable, around 6 feet long, with loose soil mounded unevenly. Nearby, he spotted a folding shovel lying in the dust, along with a pair of gloves that looked hastily tossed aside. Dispatch, he said into the radio, his voice sharp. I need a forensic team and immediate backup at my location. I've come across what looks like a newly dug burial site. Alone, he did what he could. He marked the area, snapped photos, and kept an eye on the surroundings, scanning for any movement. When additional units finally reached the scene, they began an organized search of the area. But Leah Kane was nowhere to be found. What they did uncover, however, made the situation even more unsettling. Multiple patches of disturbed soil within half a mile of where Walsh had been. Each appeared similar to the first, shallow, freshly dug, and just large enough to suggest human remains. The deeper investigators looked, the more troubling the pattern became. Over the next several weeks, it was discovered that 7 abandoned vehicles had been reported near mile marker 247 over the last 6 years. In every case, the driver had never been located. Many of the disappearances had been chalked up to people walking away from their lives, until now. Then came the break. 2 nights after Walsh's initial discovery, another patrol unit noticed a pickup truck parked close to the original site. When they approached, the driver fled into the brush. After a short chase, they caught him, Holdeman Rule, a 52-year-old truck driver whose route regularly took him along that stretch of Interstate 88. What they found in his vehicle changed everything. Inside the cab was a hidden compartment holding personal belongings linked to several missing people, including Leah Kane's ID. When detectives pulled his trucking company's GPS logs, the connection became obvious. Rule had been in the area at the same time several of those vehicles were abandoned. The case was then handed off to Detective Michelle Tran, who took over as lead investigator. Her meticulous review of the evidence revealed just how deliberate Rule's process had been. He targeted rest stops, gas stations, anywhere people were alone and vulnerable, Tran explained. He would follow them until they hit the long, dead zones where cell service dropped off, then act. His tactic was simple but effective. He used a high-powered spotlight to flash their vehicle, creating the illusion of a roadside emergency. Thinking they were being flagged for help, most victims would pull over. Then, under the cover of night and silence, he struck. Forensic teams later uncovered 5 separate graves, each within a 2-mile radius of where Leah's car had been found. DNA confirmed the identities of several individuals long listed as missing. But the real shock came 3 days after Walsh's first report. Leah Kane was found alive. She had been locked in a makeshift bunker, a reinforced room built into an abandoned mine shaft, hidden just off the highway. Authorities found her dehydrated but conscious, wrapped in a tarp and chained to a pipe. "I heard the sirens that night," she told the court. "He got spooked and said he had to go move the car. He left me here, said he'd be back. That's when Officer Walsh found the grave. That was meant for me." The investigation into Rule revealed something more chilling than anyone expected: a journal in his home. Pages upon pages, neatly written, documenting his actions. Names, locations, methods, observations. It read like a blueprint. "This wasn't random," said prosecutor Robert Kellerman during trial. "He wasn't lashing out. He planned it. He hunted." Rule had created a system. He took advantage of the highway's remoteness, of jurisdictions that didn't communicate, of how easily disappearances along open roads could be brushed aside. "He used the highway like a trap," Tran told the press. "He knew exactly how to disappear people." Officer Walsh's discovery brought the long-buried truth into the light, turning what seemed like routine traffic stops into a web of murder stretching across 3 states. For Walsh, the experience remains deeply personal. "I drive past mile 247 every night I'm on duty," he told cadets during a training seminar. "And I think about all the cars I've pulled up behind. How many of those moments felt routine? How close I might have been to something like this before." Holden and Rule was found guilty of multiple counts of homicide, kidnapping, and attempted murder. He was sentenced to 6 life terms without the possibility of parole. His case prompted a review of missing persons reports and unsolved disappearances along freight corridors across the western U.S. The stretch of road near mile marker 247, once just another part of I-17, is now patrolled regularly, with officers briefed on the case as part of their training. Because the worst dangers on the road, it turns out, aren't just mechanical failures or drunk drivers. Sometimes it's the man behind you with a smile, a spotlight, and a plan. In the aftermath of the case, state officials took decisive action. Emergency call boxes were installed every 5 miles along the more isolated stretch of Interstate 88, giving stranded drivers a way to reach help even where cell service failed. The department also launched a new Safe Highway initiative, which increased nighttime patrols and added surveillance cameras at high-risk zones along the route. Among seasoned troopers, the investigation became a turning point, a stark example of how what looks like a routine report, like a car left with hazard lights blinking, can spiral into something deeply disturbing. A new officer training module was created in response to the case. Its central lesson? Never assume anything is ordinary. What led to Leah Kane being rescued instead of vanishing forever came down to one patrolman choosing to take an extra step, to follow a trail that most might have overlooked. As the program manual states, Mile 247 isn't just a marker anymore, it's a reminder. Among patrol officers, they now refer to it informally as Walsh's Post, an unofficial tribute to how a quiet moment on a late shift turned into the unraveling of a multi-state serial investigation. What seems like just another stretch of highway, a place people barely notice as they pass through, turned out to be hiding something far worse beneath its dust and silence. Today, a modest roadside memorial stands a few feet off the shoulder near what was once the epicenter of the search. Erected by families of the victims, it's unmarked by names or dates. Just one short line carved into the stone. They were not forgotten. Officer Connor Walsh still makes it a habit to pull over there during his rounds. Sometimes he stands by the marker, other times he just sits in the patrol car with the engine running. No sirens, no reports to file, just a quiet moment to remember the people who never made it home. And the one woman who did, because someone chose to look closer.